Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Reverend Leslie Peters RN. She is a global, as she says, global ambassador for truth, justice, and the divine arts. She's also an inspirational speaker. Welcome to the show,
Well,
Reverend Leslie.
thank you. Hi, how are you doing today? Good? How's your
Very
heart?
good, Reverend Leslie.
How's your heart today? Since we're talking about the heart.
Heart is very good, much better than yesterday, and I hope it to be better tomorrow.
Yeah. It's funny the past couple weeks, like I'm super sensitive to the energies and I don't know what it was last few weeks, but man, my heart was just felt so heavy. I'm like, phew, today it lifted, thank goodness. But
Absolutely.
yeah. So I don't want to take control, which sometimes I can do when it comes to conversation, but you lead off. Where would you like
No,
to
it's
start?
when conversations happen, there is no control,
Yeah,
Reverend
I
Leslie.
know.
It's all about conversation, but to keep it in the right, sort of a direction, we will be talking about, not only we'll be talking about the science of heart-based healing because you talk about all these things, and that is where. But before that, let's understand a bit more about you, your background, your journey, so that the audience understands, learns a bit more about who they are listening to,
Okay.
Reverend.
So let's see if I can give you a 60-second version. Um, Personally, growing like most of us, I had trauma starting around the age of 2. And around that time, I started hearing this like voiceless voice in my heart, right? Like inner guidance. And it taught me how to feel safe with myself and to have a perspective of trauma that it was just an experience and that it meant nothing about me. And it kind of guided me to look at why other people were hurting when they refused to help or hurt me. And I mean, this started really early. To be honest with you, I see now I was awake my whole life, but I was asleep to the fact that I was awake, right? Like despite having daily adversity and trauma and challenges, I never saw it that way. I always saw it as a gift. And so I never had the mindset of trauma, and I was able to turn trauma to love. I didn't know how I did it, or I didn't know I was different than other people. I just knew the world was my home, strangers were my family, and I didn't feel alone, even though emotionally I was my whole life. Then I went in nurse by profession. It was a second career, and I worked with women who had trauma, who were at risk pregnancy. Worked with them for about 30 years. And when I left work to share this global message, in 2017, one of the deans of nursing at a Philadelphia college said, "You need to teach nurses what you're doing because your patients had improvement in life outcome by 30%. What are you doing?" And to be honest with you, that was not my intention. And I just looked and went, everything opposite you taught me to do in nursing school as far as communication was concerned. And so really it was looking back, what really helped women or hold a space for them was just my vulnerability and having authentic and transparent conversation, which allowed them to see themselves and at the same time reminded me who I was. It was really just the basic foundation of what makes us human that we kind of lost. But it really is all heart based because you can't do that if your heart chakra's closed. There you go. That was the quickest I ever said that. Usually it takes me 15 minutes to say my name.
You
Like,
you you will get a chance to speak more
yeah.
about you because it is about you itself. You are the expert for this particular episode, the master for this episode. So when you talk about about heart, uh, what do you actually mean by heart? You talk about
Sure.
heart brain coherence. So how do we do that? Because uh, is it easy to do it that way? Either because if you use brain then you have to forget your heart a bit more. Help us understand in that backdrop, Reverend Leslie.
So heart brain coherence, and I found I did all this stuff as a child and as an adult and was not aware of what I was doing. I was simply listening to the inner voice we all have, right? And the inner voice is our connection to the divine, to the ethereal realm, to our higher selves. But I think what happens is most of us and kids, we learn at some point that it's not safe to say what we're feeling, or to be who we think we are. And I think we slowly put on that armor, and that armor blocks the heart chakra and it blocks that inner voice. And I like to always say to people, if this is your heart and you put the armor on it, well, here's your heart without the armor. It's beating and the pain goes out and moves its way through. And so does love. It goes out to the world. When we block it, nothing can get out. And the pain we're trying to hide from is actually trapped within us, right? So what I've learned in the past couple of years of science is that when the heart is open, the heart chakra is open. And what that means for us is that we're willing to sit in the dark and discomfort of pain, right? Like we're not hiding from our pain. But when the heart is open, it communicates with the brain. And there's the energy they talk about. I mean, I don't have science behind what I'm about to say, but my theory is that when we are awake and our heart is open, that the heart communicates directly with the third eye, thereby bypassing the executive brain and what they call the primitive brain. And that's why I believe our brains are intended to work rather slow, and we don't use a large portion of our brain because I achieved things that, looking back, I really should not have achieved, right? Because there were a lot of learning challenges. And looking back, I got through college, I have 2 degrees, finished top of my class in nursing, and I never read a book. I looked at pictures, you know. But so when the heart communicates directly with the brain, there's a gentleman on YouTube. Um, it's called Music Medicine, I think. It's a TED Talk. And this engineer discovered that at 40 hertz, the heart, the brain, and the energy, the universal energy, are all in coherence. And when that happens, you tap into the flow state, which my life was like flow, right? It was just everything seemed to magically happen. And also, when you're talking about physical health, when the heart and the brain are working at the same pace and they're in conjunction with the energy around us, then you don't heal the body, but I think it kind of tricks the body into thinking it's in homeostasis, which means everything's good. Because I used to go in, my body never, lab tests and diagnostic tests never reflected the truth of what was going on in my body, right? Like, for example, I had a surgery once and the doctor's like, you were hemorrhaging, but the blood value to show you were hemorrhaging was normal. So I think when we're in coherence like that, it may not heal the body, but it tricks the body into thinking it's healed. Does that make
Right.
sense? I try to,
Yes, yes, yes. Indeed, indeed, Reverend
yeah.
Leslie.
And
So
I think for me, the way I got into that state was by listening to this instead of this. And I also, when I was 16, the way I dealt with my trauma and needing to feel part of something bigger than my own story is I went out and I just started driving in different neighborhoods and looking at people and going, what do they have in common with me? And I did this for a couple months, and then I wanted to learn more about people. So I would just park the car and walk up and down the street and stop people and say, hey, my name's Leslie, and I kind of struggle with this. What about you? And we would have like eye to eye contact, and it would be that deep, intimate. emotional intimacy, whether it be a 5 or 10 minute conversation, followed by a hug. And I really think it was that hugging and that emotional intimacy which allowed me to tap into that flow state.
Absolutely, absolutely. Reverend Leslie, you talk about, acing pain, how we can ace pain. So how do we do that? Is it good for the heart? Is it bad for the heart? How do
Good.
we get pain from pain outside us? Tell us about this.
So,
How it
so
is.
I'll tell you what, the way I was saying, the last 7 years, ever since I left work and I listened to the inner voice, I ignored it for a couple years, but then eventually I listened. But I've been around people whose, I guess, how can I say this tactfully? I worked with people who struggled, right? People who had trauma, people who were low income, homeless, drug addicts. Like people had no choice but to acknowledge the struggle, their suffering, because it was there every day, right? But I think what happens, the people I've been around the last 7 years were more professionals who I think if the level of struggle wasn't so much, it's easier to hide from it. And from those closed hearts, armored hearts, I couldn't connect the way I could, right? And for me, what happened was the energy of hugging and that emotional intimacy, it would like flow through the heart, right? And I think it all built up. And so when I was saying my heart was heavy, that was pain. And I went, oh, our hearts don't ache because they're empty. They ache because they're too full of the energy of love. So how do you ace pain? This is what I started doing at the age of 2 that the inner voice told me to do. Whenever I felt unsafe, right, emotionally and physically, I would place my hand on my heart. You want to do it with me? You put your
Right,
hand on your
right.
heart,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then they taught me to breathe from ground to crown. So you take a breath up and you hold your abs in tight, bring it all the way up, and then bring it back down. All right. And I call it rubber band breathing. I would just circle around and breathe up and down while I was holding my heart. And then I would close my eyes and imagine a place where I felt safe. Now, I really couldn't see the place initially, but the important part is that feeling of safe, right? And so as I would do this, it gave me a way to, even though my environment wasn't safe, I could connect with myself, right? By feeling your heartbeat. And I learned how to ground myself and to regulate so that even though I wasn't safe, I felt safe with me. And that is the key with life, right? So and I do this all the time still now throughout the day, but it's your own little through high school, through school, elementary school, I would tell teachers in kindergarten, first, second grade, sexual abuse, and no one did anything. So I would put my hand on my heart and go, safe, the world's a loving, and I would repeat, I am safe, the world's a loving, accepting place. I am safe, the world's a loving, accepting place. And so, when I learned the science behind what I was doing, it was visioning, it was affirmation, it was the breathing. And so in order to connect with the pain, I mean, you have to be willing to feel uncomfortable, right? Which is much easier said than done. But the fun part of it is what I realized by doing this, we all have dark, we all have pain. The gift we're given by God, source, whatever you believe it is the pain, because when you can do this and when you can learn to sit in it, then you have a choice what to do with it. You can turn it to light or you can keep it dark, right? I used mine to turn it to light. So, people think transformation is a one and done. I do this every day. I mean, it's just a way of being. But the key with acing pain, and I it's called acknowledging, connecting, and embracing it, you know, is not to run from it. Running from it is the worst thing we can do because we trap that pain within us. And then we're like at war with ourselves for, forever, you know, until we free it. But I think looking back at the science behind everything that I was guided to do, we're so overthinking. You know, what I, as a child, no support, no mentors, no guidance, in the presence of trauma, was able to turn trauma to love simply by listening to this over the thoughts in my head, you know, and it led me to what you want to call God consciousness, unity consciousness. And there's a science behind that too. When you hold your breath and breathe like that, it increases the cerebral spinal fluid up to the pineal gland. It does a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it helps you shift perception and it puts you into that oneness. To this day, I still look at the world and I see everyone as me. I try, you know, see a piece of me in everyone I see.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Reverend Leslie, I want to understand you talk about living with love. And so, living with love, everyone wants to live with love, but
Yeah.
uh,
How do
not
you do it?
everyone will let you live with love. How do I do this love part, when there is so much of vested interest around? Everyone interest might clash with me, even they don't hit me personally.
Yeah.
They may not love me as much as I want them to love, or perhaps love myself.
This is true. This is true. And so that's the cool thing about when you learn to ground and feel safe with yourself, you can become the objective observer to your experiences and see that they're not about you. Once you know that somebody's behavior is because of their pain and you simply have, you're on the receiving end, then you can not get upset by it, right? Love, I think we all have this fairy tale version of love, and I don't look at love as that. Actually, I made everything acronyms because I was such a simple message. I was having a hard time getting it through to professionals. So, live with love is in my world. It's look to inspire, validate, and elevate through listening with objectivity, vulnerability to empower. And when you do that, and that includes ourself, right? When you listen with objectivity and vulnerability to empower yourself, once we can have heart, and heart to me is honesty, empathy, acceptance, respect, and trust. Once we can have that for ourselves, then you don't have to try. I've never tried to be kind or loving. Actually, if I try to be, it usually doesn't work, right? It just becomes, once you have that for yourself, then it kind of just automatically happens. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
I can love, I can unconditionally love anybody. It doesn't mean I like them or I want to be around them. But the same way, you know, one of the ways when I was a kid, I realized this when I was a teen, I said, I love a lot. Like I'd be driving, ooh, I love that. I love that. I love that. I love my coffee. I love this blanket. And so love just becomes, it's an energy. Really, that's all it is. And, you know, nowadays I get really frustrated when I hear them talk about high and low energy because I don't think that's truly the case. When I had my brain studied, when I found out all this stuff, my alpha waves, which are the creative thing, they were like twice the normal amount, but they were half the speed. They were like the Schumann resonance, very low energy. I think it's more of active and stagnant. And when our heart chakra is closed, our energy isn't active, right? So the key truly is the heart chakra being open. If your heart chakra is closed, right? And I've seen this happen with people so many times that deep down they know, they sense they're loving and compassionate people, right? But if they're in protection mode in their heart, their actions and their words don't line up with who they know they are, right? And so then, comes out as either bullying, controlling, passive aggressiveness. I kind of just look at everybody, including myself, saying, we're all like hurt 5-year-olds. So, you know, when I sense through the years, I've gotten really good at discernment. Like I can tell whose heart's closed and who's not. And so it can be frustrating, but when I see someone who I feel their heart is closed and the words they are speaking are not what I feel coming from their heart, I want to just go like, be yourself. You're so much better than you think you are, because we are better than we think we are. So loving is, I'm not even going to say you have to love yourself in the traditional sense, because growing up this way, again, I didn't know. My intention was simply to find joy in the moment because I couldn't figure out the world, right? To find joy in the moment and to live in the moment and to give other people what I needed. And luckily, I needed to be seen and accepted for who I was. So I just, whatever I needed emotion wise, I gave to others. And, I think we have to, I've written a book, it's not out there yet, but redefining a lot of words that, you know, over time, whatever, love is like relationships. I learned emotional intimacy is so important in keeping the heart open, right? And with spiritual awakening, like when you're awake, if you don't have authentic and transparent connection with other people and you don't have that need for emotional intimacy, spiritual awakening can be really difficult because you don't really desire anything. You know what I mean? Like when you've come to the point where you see what's really important in life, and that's just us, um, there's really not much to do. So you need that emotional intimacy and that connection. All right, I've talked. Let me ask you, what's your experience with all this?
No, you are absolutely correct. I agree with that. Emotional
Yeah.
part is very much important, and that is what we seek. Everyone seeks that special connection with their heart, with the nature, with the universe, with the divine, and
Yeah.
through that they come to understand better
Yeah.
about themselves. That's what I also agree with.
Yeah. So, what's your experience? Like, give me a situation, if you can think of one offhand, where there's been somebody you tried to love just as a human being, right? Like, not a relationship per se, but, and they were really hard to love. Like, what's your,
Though we keep on meeting people, we keep on. I like my guests. I love my guests, and they bring. But sometimes guests can also be difficult too, because you want to help them, you want to amplify them, but they don't want to amplify. For example, you want to share their episodes everywhere, but they may not want to share anywhere. Forget about on any of the social media and all. So it is
yeah,
another way of love. You want to
yeah,
amplify them, you want to make the best for them, but how do you help them if they are not ready to amplify their own product which they have worked so hard to
yeah.
create, like in this one? So that is
You,
another form I can explain.
what? I think what I found too is I was always that kind of person who said what we're not supposed to say. But because I've learned in my life, true, you can never go wrong with speaking the words of your heart. It may not pay off in the immediate moment, but long term, as far as how we show up for ourselves, right? So, I think we in general just have a really hard time speaking what's on our heart. Like I've used silence as my strategy, right? Like I grew up with a lot of unhealthy emotionally. people, and there were a lot of things said that I could have argued back and forth, but I would go, oh, okay, well, let me see. It's going to take a lot of energy to try to get my point across, and there's a really good chance they're not going to hear it anyway. So I will just I will silence thoughts in my head or what my head wants to say. I never silence the words of my heart. And it doesn't matter who it makes uncomfortable, because I've been shown in my lifetime that when I speak my truth, people go, oh yeah, you think that too? It's just other people are afraid to say it. So I think the truth and being vulnerable gives a space for other people, if
Right.
they so desire, to do the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Right,
And just a
Leslie.
heads up, I kind of suck on social media. I have a hard time using tech. If I put it on one, which one would you prefer I put it on?
It is
Afterwards,
okay.
you
We
let
see
me know.
that example is not for people. I do understand when
I
I
know.
know. When I do the research, I also know who is comfortable with social media, who is not. So that is
Yeah.
not beyond. It's like that, as they say, you can bring the horse to the water, but you cannot force it to drink. So may
Yeah.
not every horse requires to be forced to
Yeah.
drink. So
Yeah.
this is like that, and so that's the life. Don't worry about these things.
Yeah.
The words sometimes travel faster than social media, and your
Yeah.
your words are words of wisdom, Reverend Leslie, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from what we just learned from you. So all those people who would
Yeah.
want to connect with you, learn from you, learn more about you, and also about your upcoming book, what's the best way
Did
for them to connect with you, Reverend Leslie?
I guess email, usually phone, but I can give my phone number. I don't care. I learned that a spiritually enlightened brain, and I actually call it like neurodivinity of trauma. It doesn't. There are a lot of eye-hand coordination things, in which is why social media doesn't work. I hit the wrong buttons. I post things I don't mean to post. But I would say email, which is Rev Leslie Peters RN at gmail.com.
Wonderful,
Yeah, but
wonderful.
the cool thing and part of my mission that I'm doing is when we get good at this, right? Like I think the whole purpose of humanity was really just for us to hold a space for one another, to remind us of who we are, the light, right? So when I go up and I touch people's hearts, like I'll go on the street and just touch them and put their hand on mine, and you can see the body just goes, you know, blood pressure lowers. I showed to one of our doctors, I'm like, touch your patient's heart. And we tested it with each other's, and it lowers blood pressure. So that's, I have a very out of the box mission, and it's more of an experience to start with and then the education afterwards. But if anyone wants to learn this, you know, I'm on a divine mission, and so the big guy's kind of taking care of my expenses, so I don't charge for what I do. I was given this as a child to share with others. Yeah, so anyone, just feel free, and I'll be more than happy to chat with anyone and talk them through it.
Absolutely, absolutely, Reverend Leslie. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining
Thank you
us.
so much. Thank you.